Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Nancy Drew Games review series, where we are ranking every single Nancy Drew game on 6 key aspects: the story and premise of each game, the suspects, the puzzles, the music, the atmosphere, and the ending of each game. I'm your host, Jameson.
And I'm Julian. What's up, everybody?
And today we are reviewing Nancy Drew Trail of the Twister.
Jumping into Trail of the Twister, immediately what comes to mind is the story. This Nancy Drew game, in my opinion, has arguably one of the most mature stories, and it's very well fleshed out. It's very well written. Each character, they have really strong motivations that, in my opinion, exceed all other Nancy Drew cases. I don't know. It just feels like a very lifelike environment, and the characters really come to life in this game.
It's got a great reason for Nancy being on the job. There's great motivation behind the culprit, probably some of my favorite motivation behind a culprit ever, but we'll get into that in the ending of the game. And otherwise, I think we might as well just go ahead and get into the premise and introduction. So PG Krollmeister is a name that many Nancy Drew fans will probably know by now at this point in the franchise. He is a wealthy industrialist of some sorts who has been seen creating products all around the franchise, and the players... Bring him in here.
He's meowing at the wall.
Most players of the franchise will have recognized the name Krollmeister to be stamped on all sorts of products found throughout the franchise. This ranges anywhere from just tools that you'll find in the games, or maybe even some food products and stuff. Krollmeister is just like the Acme or Cintas of the Nancy Drew world. They're like the Nestle. Everything that gets produced, they have a hand in it, and PG Krollmeister has called on Nancy for help with this case, because... Do you want to talk about why? You seem like you want to say something.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say, we see Krollmeister pretty much mention every single case up until 22, and I never knew that the man of the company was actually named Krollmeister. I don't know why, I just associated that as just like a company name. But no, that's actually the CEO's name. That was pretty funny.
Yeah, PG Krollmeister is one of the key backers of the Canute Storm Chasing Team, which is competing in the Oklahoma Green Skies competition for the $100 million grant on tornado and storm chasing research. Now, real quick, a bit of setting for those who don't know. Oklahoma is the #1 state in the United States with the most tornadoes, and this particular place where this case takes place, Tornado Alley, is super infamous for having tornadoes. You get dozens of tornadoes there every year, I'll bet, and people die every year, rest assured. And so it's a huge, huge public safety risk and government funnel for money to make sure that as much research and safety and prevention funds can get put into storm chasing and tracking weather as much as possible. And that's what this game is about. The annual Green Skies competition is being hosted there, and the Canute Storm Chasing Team is participating in it, where the prize is a $100 million grant to the storm chasing team who can come up with the best data and equipment and track the most storms and everything else that goes on in the season.
So the problem starts to arise when a couple of mysterious incidents, almost looking like sabotage, start to arrive out of the Canute tornado chasing team. And the backer, PG Krollmeister, he needs to have the utmost confidence that he can trust this investment in the team, but he doesn't have that yet, hence hiring Nancy to investigate what's going on with the team.
Krollmeister is a very shrewd man, and when more than one accident happens, he starts to think it's foul play. And so he sends Nancy to pose as an intern and join the Canute Storm Chasing Team to try to get her finger to the pulse and figure out if there's any foul play going around, which is causing all these accidents. And the accidents range anywhere from crucial files going missing to GPSs malfunctioning and leading storm chasers right into a giant storm.
Now this game, interestingly enough, it also has a 5-suspect pool, and it might go off of my little theory that Her Interactive was trying to compensate for the severe lack of suspects in case 20. I don't know, because we see 2 cases in a row with 5 suspects. I just thought that was an interesting little thing that they did. But each suspect in this game, they each have their own particular roles that make the story flow so nicely. And I gotta admit that going into the case, I wasn't that excited or enthusiastic, but each suspect really had like their own personal thing that it made the game come to life, and especially the motivation at the end of the game with the spoiler alert, the culprit is Scott. His motivation, I dare call it the best culprit reveal and overall just character arc that resulted in his actions. I don't know.
We'll get to him at the ending, so just make sure everything's in the right place. Otherwise, I think we might as well get into suspects. So the game begins with Nancy rolling up to the Canute farmhouse, which it should be noted that is only used by the Canute storm chasing team in this storm season of the year. Every other time of the year, it's actually used by the Healy Research Center from Game 15, Creature of Kapu Cave, and they're briefly mentioned by Debbie, who you meet pretty soon. And she just calls them that Mucky Muck Research Center in Hawaii, which is just about all a learned Nancy Drew player needs to know in order to infer that this is the Healy.
In the first instance Nancy pulls up to this house, we actually get to see a tornado. It's a pretty cool cutscene, and it's not the most intense of tornadoes, but it throws a lot of debris around. And then when Nancy's finally coming up to enter the farmhouse, she's digging through the rubble to the entrance, and she finds a tin box with a little note in it saying, "Thank you for what you did, blah blah blah." I forget it verbatim, but it's got a ton of money in it. And then after investigating a little more in the house, it's very clear that the people, this Canute storm chasing team, they're in some desperate need for some money. We got mice everywhere. It's just like a little shoddy farmhouse that they're working out at.
It's not that they're in desperate need for money so much, but just that they are a ramshackled operation, and whatever they once were, they certainly aren't that anymore.
Yeah, professional is the farthest word I would use from them. I don't know, it just doesn't seem like that good of an operation they're running.
3 times when Nancy explores the house before people shows up, she runs into mice. And just wait until you see Scott's office. Scott's office is just...
It's disgusting.
Yeah, he's got papers and files and books stacked miles high, just crooked paintings on the walls. It's just probably the messiest room in any Nancy Drew. I could probably award Scott's office that title.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So anyhow, let's see. Nancy arrives at the farmhouse and just does a couple of chores left behind for her on a note from Debbie. Debbie is the pretty much assistant manager. She's Scott's right-hand woman. And after doing some of these chores, Debbie comes by. She is a pretty interesting character in the sense that she's kind of just lukewarm as far as suspects go. She's always kind of nice to Nancy. She's trying to be all friendly and welcome to her as she's the new intern.
You certainly wouldn't expect the plot twist that comes out of her later in the game, which was pretty interesting. Her character, yeah, she's extremely mild. She mainly exists at the beginning of the game to assign chores, which kind of irked me a little bit, made me predisposed to not like her, but she's also really into theater, which is actually kind of a big thing in the Oklahoma town around here. We see a couple of suspects that actually get really into theater, and it's what she devotes all of her free time to. You get the sense that she's just a woman, a very hard-working woman who dedicates herself to her job and the theater, which I can respect. But what makes her character very interesting is that herself and another character, Frosty, they've teamed up to try to almost backstab Scott and get him off of the operation because they think that he's an inferior leader than anything else they could have.
Yeah, we'll get into more about their motivations later on. But otherwise, in terms of characters that you meet next, I suppose Scott would be the next person that you do meet. So Scott, you get sent into his room, and he's just not in the best mood. You tell him that you saw a tornado when you pulled up to the house, and he gets into a little fit about how great we spent the whole day searching around the countryside trying to find tornadoes, and there's just one in our backyard. This stuff that your uncle saddled us with, because Nancy's posing as the nephew, or the niece, I believe, of Krollmeister, and he keeps on referring back to Nancy and how she's got a rich uncle, and you can tell that he's kind of spiteful about that, because he's having some financial trouble of himself. But otherwise, he asks you stuff like, what did you think of that tornado? And just like, did you think it was cool and stuff like that? And it's kind of interesting, because that's a plot point that he picks back up on later, because he has a very personal connection with storm chasing. You can tell that it's his passion.
That little thing that Scott can ask you about the tornado, it's just a small little example of his character coming to life. You really get the sense that this is a man who's really passionate about storms, and he's extremely overlooked in the world, in the professional world at least, of storms. He mentions that he's a professor at what is his term for the college?
Some podunk college town.
Yeah, I mean, the best analogy that I can give it is truly from Breaking Bad. He's pretty much Walter White, just like an actual genius who's extremely underappreciated for his work. And he doesn't have the resources to prove that he's a genius. It's pretty much a tragic story if you think about it. And he's just stuck in this town, working away at something that he can pretty much make no progress on. And something that's really interesting is that he's indirectly responsible for a death of a character we never got to meet.
We'll get to that in just a second. But first, there's Tobias Harlow, who is in the basement of the ranch house. He could be one of the more fun characters in this game. Some people are probably annoyed by him, but I think he's a really fun and captivating character. So Tobias got the nickname Frosty from a rather dangerous endeavor of his on the storm chasing team, where he was taking some pictures of some clouds that he thought were looking kind of nice and pretty. I don't know, I'm not a storm chaser. When the clouds suddenly shifted, the barometer fell and it began hailing really, really hard. He ran back to his car and it got absolutely decimated by the hail, to the point where a hailstone the size of his fist came crashing through the windshield and banged him up, and he ended up spending some time in the hospital. Who knows how true the story is, but rest assured it gave him the reputation of being fearless storm photographer Frosty Harlow. And he conspires with Debbie in the coup to overthrow Scott that we'll get to in a bit. That's a very interesting subplot that doesn't get that much time touched on it, but just enough that it remains relevant throughout the story. Otherwise, at the ranch, you have the lead mechanic, Chase. I'm sorry, our cat is shoving his head in a plastic bag and making loud noises. He doesn't normally do this. Mr. F. Mr. F, come here. Okay, this review will have our third special guest on this review, Mr. F, who may be chiming in every now and again to say something. Mr. F, are you okay? What is he doing? So moving on to Chase then. Chase is the lead mechanic of the Canute storm chasing team. He's situated out in the barn on the ranch house, and he's a pretty interesting guy. He's a country boy, you can tell. Nancy asks him, do they call you Chase because you go out and chase twisters? And he goes, do they call you Nancy because you answer too many questions? He goes, I'm sorry, that was funnier in my head. And he says, of course not. If you're around these parts, you're lucky enough if a twister don't go chasing you. So he's a real colorful, good old boy. He has the most benign subplot, I'd say, where it turns out that he is trying to find some oil that he believes is somewhere on this property, and just trying to get rich quick that way, but he's not necessarily trying to double-cross or backstab anybody in the process.
You know, if you think about it, I think the game would have flowed just as nicely if his character never existed.
Well,
what is he good for in the story?
He gives you paw pennies. He lets you fix little weather balloon circuit boards to make paw pennies, so that's something.
If that's a character's only point in the game, that could have easily been absorbed by some little feature in Paws' house. His character just felt irrelevant, in my opinion.
His character felt like a luxury. He was a nice person to have around, plus he had some fire puzzles.
But, I mean, in retrospect, what did he add?
He was a nice, colorful person to confide in on the ranch. Just let it go. Oh, he made the handy-dandy prairie dog vacuum.
Okay, I suppose.
Okay, Chase, if anything, was a mechanic to make a lot of the best puzzles in this game happen. So, on that note, I think we should talk about the final suspect, and one of my all-time favorites, honestly, and that would be Paw of Ma and Paw's General Store. Now, I've always had an affinity for general stores. They're just almost like museums in and of themselves, especially when they're way out in the country. And Paw runs this little operation. It's a family-owned general store, which he runs with his wife, who the town knows as Ma. And everyone is very hesitant to talk about Ma, and that's because she is the part of a rather upsetting subplot that you never really directly get told, but you can find plenty of clues around that outright say it. Which is that about 3 years ago or so, the Canute team had a problem where they could not get all their sirens radius to cover the entire county, so that when a tornado came in, not everybody knew about it, and they couldn't hear the sirens. And one of these people was Ma, Paw's wife, who ended up dying in the tornado.
See, this directly goes back to Scott's frustrations and that he isn't properly funded or equipped with anything he needs to help do his research, one, and pretty much preserve the safety of all these people.
Debbie says that ever since Ma died, Scott's never been the same. And that's a real hard thing for her, because Debbie was one of Scott's best students, and she really looked up to him for the longest time.
And you know, come to think of it now, I can really see that depression in Scott just through talking with him. He looks like a guy who doesn't take care of himself, like an example depressed guy.
He's got a whole lot of stubble going on. He just dresses like a dad, and just kind of seems like he's always slovenly shaped and placed into the world.
No, yeah, I think that's exactly what her interactive was going for, was a really depressed person without outwardly saying they're depressed. But going back to Pa, some people don't really rule him as a suspect, but I say he has enough motive considering his loved one died to to an accident on the behalf of the Canute storm chasing team.
But make no mistake, he never comes off like malicious or malevolent or like he has a bone to pick with Sky.
Yeah, not at all.
He's the friendliest man alive.
And his shop adds so much fun to the game, especially his currency. Paw pennies.
Oh yeah, paw pennies.
There's just a lot to love about Paw and his general store. It's definitely my favorite part of the game. I don't think there's much debate about that.
Okay, I'm just gonna say it right now because I don't know where else it'll go in this review. My favorite part of this game is just causing pile-ups and just broadsiding people on the road. That was the most fun thing. We should have more games with navigation mechanics where you can just like get into a storm-chasing mystery machine van and just broadside an 18-wheeler. That was the best. You could like just nudge it in front of an intersection and other cars would just crash right into it. But
Alright, I think we've covered suspects for the most part. We'll jump back and forth throughout, but I think we should move on to puzzles now.
okay. Puzzles and story for this game are the two shining features, and I'm not sure which is better, but the puzzles in this game are really, really good.
The puzzles, I'd say a lot of them... I don't really like when Her Interactive does this, but right at the start of the game, they throw like 4 puzzles straight in your face. It's puzzle after puzzle after puzzle. There's the filing puzzle, there's the alarm puzzle, buying everything at Paws puzzle, which is a really unique puzzle. I'm saying puzzle too much. I'm sorry. That's just the one word that sums up the beginning of this game. Puzzles.
I'd say that's the one where that sums up the most of the game. And honestly, I prefer that to a game like Ghost of Thornton Hall, where you can explore for like 30 minutes before you come across your first puzzle.
Okay, so... yeah, I talked about how we're thrown into a ton of them, but I'd say my favorite one actually comes right at the beginning. It's the Storm Siren puzzle.
I'd say that that's a good one too.
That and fixing Frosty's camera. That's a really good one. And this game has a really good danger theme. Okay, off topic,
yeah,
but yeah.
This is gonna be one of the few games where we like give a little limelight to the danger theme when we get the music. But otherwise, this game was a champion of having logical puzzles. There were a lot of puzzles that were very, very simple in the concept, but really difficult in execution, which I think is the best kind of puzzle, where there's no mistake about the directions, but the solution is difficult to find. And the best example is what Julian's talking about, probably, which is the...
Siren puzzle?
Yeah, the siren chart puzzle. So, kind of in reference to how Ma wasn't able to hear the twisters in time and ended up being killed by the tornado, you have to get this giant map of the county with a whole bunch of different pinpoints for siren speaker locations, and then these little circles that cover the blast radius, or the sound radius for each siren, and figure out a way that you can place each siren with each different frequency and emitter so that they will cover the entire county, including overlap, to make sure that there is not one speck of land where anyone can be in this county where they won't be able to hear a tornado siren in the event of a severe weather.
So it's a fun puzzle, but not only that, it's really important too.
Yeah, it kind of gives gravity to the game because Nancy's just an intern, but she's already having lives put in her hand in a sense.
Okay, a little negative on the behalf of puzzles. They repeat the mouse catching puzzle way too much.
Oh, okay,
it's
yeah.
just time consuming, and it would have been better if it was 1 or 2 times in the game.
It's probably a speedrun killer now that I think about it.
What is it, 5 times in the game?
4 times at least. There could be a 5th time. You have to do it in Scott's room, Debbie's room, the basement,
Ma and Paws.
maybe in the barn, and then Mom and Pa. So I'd say 4 times.
It's 5. You just counted 5.
I mean, maybe in the barn.
Oh.
Let's say 4.5.
Oh, okay. 4.5. Take it or leave it. It's just it's an easy puzzle, but it's slow. It's like, I wish there was a speed up feature on this thing.
And every time you do it, Nancy has to go out to the old, Orchard Creek windmill or Fraser windmill to go dump out the mice in the spring house because she can't just carry around a crap ton of mice in her bag all day.
Yeah, that's a little... I mean, I guess I don't mind it. It's just a little too repetitive. We see it way too much. Another puzzle I gotta touch on is the fixing Frosty's camera. It's like, well...
Renegrams.
It's like Renegrams. I was just gonna say, it's a game early from Renegrams. It's super fun. I don't know what it is. The danger theme adds to the intensity. But I love this style of puzzle. I guess its official name is called Renegrams, as we find out in the next game.
Yeah, man, if I had a book of Renegrams, like how you get books of Sudoku, I would do that all the time. Renegrams are tons of fun.
I know, they're actually really fun.
But basically, for those of you who don't know, it's basically this giant shape with a whole bunch of squares in it, and each square is a number that's like 1 to 60 or something, and you need to find a way to place them so all numbers are consecutive, and some numbers are automatically placed down, so you can't just go in binary, just rows and rows. It's difficult to explain, but if you've played this game, I'm certain you know what it is, because the game plays the danger theme all throughout and gives you the impression that it's a timed puzzle, which makes it very stressful if you don't know that you have all the time in the world.
It's worth mentioning that we do fix the camera in time. Frosty does get the pictures, but afterwards he says that he didn't get any. It's really mysterious, but then we find out that he's been selling the pictures, or at least making it look like they never got taken place in the first place.
Yeah, Frosty has been selling the photos to a different news outlet under, I think, a fake name. He's using a pseudonym or something, because he's kind of establishing right now that Canute is a dead-end job, and if he wants to make it in the photography world, he says that fun fact, he says at one point that his goal is to make it to Antarctica to try to take a picture of these super rare clouds that are speculated to not even exist. There's like no photos of them ever taken. I forget what they're called.
Well, wait, just to chime in, this is a top 5 educational game too.
Oh, totally, yeah.
You learn so much about cloud types, I mean, storms, the Vegeta scale.
This game taught me more about storms and clouds than 3rd grade science did. So.
Honestly, it did. All right, I just wanted to say that. Continue.
So, anyhow, Frosty has been selling all these photos and videos to a different news outlet under a pseudonym, which I assume someday he's going to take credit for to boost his reputation, because he says that Canute is becoming a dead-end job, and that under Scott's failing leadership, he's never going to get anywhere if he just follows behind him all the time. And that's where, as the game goes on, you find out that Debbie and Frosty have been conspiring against Scott, because Debbie, it must be so hard for her, because he was her hero for a long time, and she really looked up to him. But her plan is that she needs to just cause some accidents and get Scott knocked off the team, so by getting him in trouble for something so big that the government can't stop it, intervene. And the whole plan is that she thinks that this team is being squandered under his leadership.
Jamie, I wish we did this suspect ranking thing now, because Scott would be up there as a contender for first, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so. But the one thing that I think is wrapping up... Okay, never mind. That was something I should have said.
What other puzzles do you want to touch on? There's certainly more.
Yeah, there are plenty of puzzles in this game. I just want to go over again real quick how many, like, quick and easy logic puzzles there are. There's fixing the sprinkler system, which is just opening 6 holes and they can't be in the same column, row, or diagonal line. That was a tricky one.
That's like a slap to the face. It seemed so easy at first, and dang, it took me a minute.
It's a real brain teaser. Then there's fixing the little lit-up dashboard display in Chase's car. That one is just a numbers puzzle, but it's pretty fun if you get the hang of it. You fix the gears for Chase on the second day of the game. You gotta... Ooh, you know what? You have to rearrange the candy display at Ma and Paws General Store, which is a really interesting puzzle, because I would call that the hardest making pieces and rectangles fit in a box puzzle that the entire franchise has, because it's not a perfect rectangle you're fitting them into. There's like a little advertisement thing coming out of the top. But above all, I have to say that my favorite puzzle in this game, and possibly favorite puzzle in the entire franchise, is the Ma and Paws Tornado Disaster Kit puzzle. And it's not a very hard puzzle, but it was just so clever and I really liked it. So
it's definitely unique.
It's super unique. But it's basically Scott is putting together Tornado Disaster Kit examples for a presentation he's giving at the local high school, and he asks Nancy to finish one up for him so that he can have one taken care of to bring out to them. So Nancy's given a shopping list of supplies and $30 of budget from the Canute team to go out to Ma and Paws and buy all the essentials that she needs. It's just stuff like toothpaste, flashlights, duct tape, can openers, non-perishable goods, stuff like that. And for every product, there is multiple different brands, and they all have different deals listed. Like, if you buy this blue product, the next blue brand product that you buy will be 60% off. Or if you buy 2 green products, the third product will be free. And it's really, really interesting because you only have 30 bucks and you need to find the perfect sequence in order to buy everything you need on the list by taking advantage of all the different brand deals that there are without going over and making sure you have money to break even.
It, like, accidentally teaches younger players, like, lessons on shopping almost.
Yeah, I don't know. Looking for good deals and all that stuff.
I thought it was pretty cool.
Overall, there are definitely some difficult puzzles in this game.
The Vegeta scale.
The Vegeta scale puzzle sucks to me because there are clues that you need to solve it, and they are in very just unfortunate places. There is like an entry on the quiz computer that tells you everything you need to know for one part of it, and then I believe that there's a little clipping in Scott's office that tells you the rest, and then just in front of the display there's stuff. But that's 3 different screens in the game that are essential to solving the puzzle that would be very difficult for a new player to find. We didn't even know where the last one was, and we needed some help. But otherwise, I feel like this game has a lot of good mechanics in it. I always love being able to do the driving puzzles and just going to different places, even if it does mean getting in a couple pile-ups along the way. But overall, this is a super solid game for puzzles. I would easily say it's in the top 3 games for puzzles in the franchise.
Dang, hot take.
This, if you just want to have less story, less talking, and more puzzles, this is the game for you.
And it's not even like this is an extremely difficult game either.
No, they're all very fair puzzles, and there's plenty of them, and they're high quality. It's not quantity over quality or quality over quantity. It's just the perfect mix of puzzles left and right and difficulty for them.
Alright folks, moving on to music, and gosh, is it great in this game. It glues together the atmosphere so well, and it just seriously gives you the vibes of like this honestly little poor town in Oklahoma that's dealing with a lot of like situational stuff.
Now I want to be clear, I guess you could categorize this as country music, and I know that historically speaking, country music has not been popular among a lot of people. But if you can look past that, like how we do, it's a very, very cheerful music and soundtrack. I would call this maybe one of the happiest soundtracks in the game. There's like one track in it that's really sad, and you almost never hear it.
Okay, we just did a little checkup on every soundtrack in this game. There's like 3 or 4 outstanding soundtracks for Danger. I mean, this is a very danger-intensive game.
Yeah, and when it's not Danger, it's just really chill bluegrass vibes. I think we'll go ahead and play a couple that are just Julian and I, some of our favorites. We'll play Plains and Bluegrass back to back. How does that sound? Because we have a lot to play in this game as far as music goes.
Plains first, Bluegrass second. Here you go.
Julian likes Plains and I like Bluegrass.
So I love Plains because A, it plays the most while you're driving, and it is perfect for driving. I mean, it's almost indescribable, but it's like a very chill, very tame musical that's just so fitting for the environment. Like, you look around and I just like imagine myself there. It's just nothing but empty plains. It's a pretty low income neighborhood. This is a song that's fitting for it. It's great.
Julian and I should mention that we live up in Ohio, and every now and again when we go out into the rural country, we will always just put this on the aux cord. This is perfect music for driving around that territory.
Yeah, seriously, and that's how you know a game's got good music. You willingly listen to it on the aux? I mean, geez.
So first that I really like in the Danger category would be the Storm track, and I think that this may be the only track in the entire franchise, I can say, that does a really good job of having distinct trombone. The trombone in this track is just wild. I'll play the snippet of best trombone right here. And this track plays when you're trying to fix Frosty's Renogram camera phone thing.
Renogram camera.
Yeah, and if you had to listen to this music while trying to fix a very frustrating and difficult puzzle, you would probably think that it was a timed puzzle on top of that. And that's what we got as far as impressions go first time we played this.
Okay, another great Danger track. Okay, getting into Chase now. It's a good name because it actually happens at the end game. Well, it has 2 instances where it plays, but Chase, you're quite literally chasing Scott in the end game. It's got a great soundtrack for just that, if you can call it a puzzle, just that scenario. It's awesome music. And then it also plays when there's hailstorms and tornadoes like blocking the road paths, and you kind of need to like scheme which routes you're going to take in order to get back to either Ma and Paws or the farmhouse, and it's just super intense, great music for driving in like a storm.
As far as Danger goes, I would be remiss not to include the actual Danger track, which is only about 30 seconds long, but this plays whenever storm clouds roll in. This plays when Scott is going over his maniacal sad scheme and the storm clouds are rolling in. This is the song of storm clouds rolling in. And once it's done, you start to hear some of those other tracks that you just heard, but overall, it's a classic.
So lastly, we gotta get into the Lonely track, and I believe this is the first time Her Interactive has indirectly referenced a character in a single piece of music. Lonely definitely has a lot to do with Paws' character, specifically how, well, he's pretty much lonely. He's lost his loved one due to the storms that plague this Oklahoma City, and I mean, all he's really got is his general store going for him. He doesn't have much going on other than that in the theater. You could just pick up the essence that he's pretty sad ever since Maws left, and obviously so is Scott. I don't know. Lonely is just a kind of a theme in this game, and I think it's very fitting that this track exists in the game.
Well, that about wraps up music. I could honestly say good things about every track in this game. There's about 10 or 12, but they are just outstanding as far as capturing the essence of this little bluegrass, as Scott would call it, podunk town. And I really feel like they do a great job of making the game come alive. Now in atmosphere, this is an exceptional game for atmosphere, of course. One thing that I want to say right off the bat that I loved about this game is whenever you go driving with somebody, which is mainly Frosty, but sometimes you'll go with Debbie or even Scott, is that you'll be able to talk to them while you're on the road. And the more you drive, the longer you'll be able to hear what they have to say, and sometimes you'll unlock special dialogue with them. That's how you find out about Frosty's dream to become the first photographer to capture proof of these clouds that are said to have never existed in Antarctica. This is something that you don't see again until, like, Sea of Darkness, where you navigating or doing a puzzle or something, and you're actually talking to a character while you do it. The only other time I can think of this is fixing the space heater thing in Sea of Darkness while you talk with Dagny, because that is just a very, very atmospheric and just world-building technique that the game should do more often.
I love atmosphere in this game. I think it just captures, like, I mean, I know I keep calling it low income, but I mean, it's just...
It's a humble town. It ain't much, but it's honest work.
Yeah, no, sure, that's a good saying for it. From the farmhouse to this low general store, we don't actually see many, like, structures other than, like, a couple of windmills and, like, what was it? The place that we drop off the mice.
The Fraser Creek Spring House or something? I don't know. Maybe it's the Fraser Creek windmill. I'm getting confused.
I mean, it feels like Amish country almost.
Yeah, it does feel like Amish country.
I don't know.
Less horses and buggies, though.
And this is, like, pretty much one of the first games that's gone for this. You can somewhat compare it to Ghost Dogs. It's kind of nature focused, but like
I've never made that connection.
It's pretty nature focused, but this game, I think it strives for something different, and it definitely excelled at it. I love it for what it is.
Oh, and something else that is kind of just inferred by the title, but I still have to applaud them on doing. This game had multiple sequences of weather. There's times where it's just bright and sunny, and there's just like the lazy day blues kind of music playing. There's times where it's raining, like the very beginning of the game. There's even times where it's hailing, even if it's only when you're in your car. But this game did a really good job of making weather have an impact on the game, which not few games do. We just saw it in Warnings at Waverly, the game before this one, but a lot more games could really benefit from having a weather cycle of sorts. Well, in terms of atmosphere, we should talk about some of the times when the atmosphere directly changes, and that would probably be whenever storms roll in. So first, there's the storm at the beginning of the game, where the debris gets blown over, and Nancy has to go sift through that and ends up finding all the money that's been left for somebody. Spoiler alert, it's Scott. And we'll get more into what his motivations are in the next category. Otherwise, there's the part of the game where Nancy has to go out and fix the antennas in the field the morning after a storm, and she has to go put them all together, and once she does, a new storm begins to roll in, and Nancy needs to get back to the ranch as fast as possible. Now this scene is really kind of just panicking almost, because Nancy's GPS when she gets back into the car is not making any sense. It is sputtering complete nonsense. It's telling her instructions that would essentially tell her to go right into the heart of the storm and result in her vehicle getting damaged into incapacitation. And so once Nancy finally does get back to the ranch, she tells people about it, and they say, huh, I wonder if that was a mistake after all, and she holds her suspicions because she's Nancy Drew. Otherwise, there is a really alarming part of the game where Nancy gets woken up in the middle of the night by a storm siren that's saying that there is reports of tornado touchdowns in the area, and the danger theme begins to play again. That is probably a really memorable spot of the game for other players. I feel like in hindsight it's not the most nerve-wracking thing, because there is no way you can get killed in this scene. There's no game over sequence. Nancy just gets up, the power's out, and she sees some shadowy figure in the living room doing something, and she decides it was just her imagination, and then goes back to bed. But otherwise, one last thing I can definitely say about atmosphere in this game is that they did an excellent job of pacing it, where this game, you can't choose when you go to bed, like other games with an alarm clock.
It's got a great span of time over which the mystery takes place.
And once Nancy does like 4 or 5 chores every day, Debbie will just come over and say, "Hey Nancy, go ahead and hit the sack when you're ready," and then she just goes upstairs and progresses to the next day. And you can do that like 5 or 6 times. This game takes the span over like the course of an entire week.
And I've always appreciated games that are like this because it always seems a little nonsensical when Nancy arrives at a place, say, I don't know, the Captive Curse, solves it in a 4-hour span of when she arrives. There's a little discrepancy there, but I think it's a lot more realistic when games take place over a 5-6 day span just like this.
It's also just as goofy in games like Ghost Dogs, to be honest, where Nancy can just click back and forth and sleep for days and days and days on end just because she can. It's even more funny in Danger by Design, where it like keeps tally of what the days are, and you can just make it like day 30 if you want. But otherwise, this game had an excellent pace. I like the idea of the game taking place over the course of weeks. I think we should go ahead and get into the end game now. Towards the end of the game, nobody can find Scott, and Debbie says that she's starting to panic because she needs his help, and there's like a supercell that's about to go critical, or some storms chaser talk that there's this giant storm that's forming, and they need his help out on the field. And now, this is a very interesting part of the game, because what you do is you solve this puzzle with all of these things that... You go into Scott's office and you find an earpiece of him talking with Brooke, the leader of the rival storm chasing team. You overhear her talk with Paw earlier on, and she's kind of like egging him on. What kind of dirt can you tell me about the Canute team, Paw? Because Paw's just kind of like the local jibber-jabber water fountain cooler talk.
Well, pretty much it's made clear through the midpoint of the game that these two teams are obviously rivals. They shouldn't be associating, especially on friendly terms, and that's exactly the discovery we make when we're starting to rummage through Scott's filthy office space, is that he's been communicating pretty much on cordial terms with the rival, the direct rival, Brooke, on the other storm chasing team.
Now, Brooke is a character that you never meet, you never get to call her, and that's kind of a shame, but honestly, I can hardly complain, because her story still comes together really importantly and is essential to Scott's motivations. You find out that Scott has been throwing his own competition, and he's been sabotaging his team and taking little cuts of Brooke's pay from her budget so that Brooke's team can win the competition, and then he will then receive a cut of the prize money. And we'll get into just what his motivation is in a second. Basically, Nancy finds out that there's codes on all of the pictures that Scott has, and there's this weird coded puzzle with his calendar or something. I hardly understood it, but basically, all the pictures with the corresponding code in it are pictures of a windmill, and that's how Nancy figures out that Scott and Brooke are meeting at the windmill. And this is as a storm is about to touch down, mind you. So Nancy rides all the way out to the Fraser Creek windmill, where she meets Scott, who goes, "Nancy, what are you doing here?" And she goes, "Oh, who were you expecting, Brooke?" And it's just like, what?
Well, this starts... I'm gonna say it, my favorite monologue in a single Nancy Drew case.
Really?
Yeah, this is where Scott's heart, he just pours his heart out. He goes on an insane explanation for why he's doing what he's doing, and it's so believable. It's perfect. Pretty much it all stems from his financial struggles and how he's never been recognized as the true genius he is in the storm chasing world, all because of this little rural environment that's been holding him back, and he's the one that realized it. He knows that he has to take some very huge steps to get out of this place, whether it be legal or not, and I loved his motivation.
He's been working for years and has had people die because of the incompetency of his budget and how he doesn't have the equipment that he wants to be able to work with. He even says, "I know more about tornadoes than anyone else alive, and anyone else who ever will be alive."
Yeah, I believe him on that.
Yes. Scott is pretty much like an evil genius by the end of this game, is the kind of perception he gives off. The only thing that ever really seems to make him happy anymore is when he talks to you about tornadoes every now and again in the game and sees what your fascinations are with them, because that is his life's work. He is so passionate about tornadoes, and he thinks that they're beautiful and dangerous, and he's always interested to have a nice student. And he talks about how upset he is that he has horrible students these days that never seem interested in his work, and he says he'll be talking about the storm of the century, and the best he gets is an eye roll from the class.
That's totally true. Every single dialogue option you have with Scott, nothing really sparks his interest like the ones with tornadoes, especially when, I mean, it actually happens. The game takes a pretty nice note of it. The first time you exit your conversation with Scott and you're leaving, Scott immediately drags you right into a conversation. You don't even click on him. He's like, hey, so Nancy, what'd you think of that tornado? And it's a little different side of this character that we see depressed the majority of the game. He seems genuinely excited by what a potential pupil might think of the tornado. I don't know. It just gives him like a little re-energized look, and that's exactly what he's lacking in his life.
Now, here's the thing. I'm honestly really sad about the ending, because I feel like Scott should have gotten away with it. He was such a...
Oh, that would have been cool.
I mean, like, he was... Oh, the poor dude.
I know,
This is the most sympathetic culprit, I think.
For sure, and
the game,
love that.
But the thing is, the game doesn't really show him in much of a sympathetic life, if anything.
I think it does, and I mean, I didn't notice it before doing this review. This game perfectly depicts him as a depressed guy who never actually reaches out for help.
He is super disgruntled, and he doesn't know what to do anymore as far as trying to make his profession and passion work.
Yeah, he's a great culprit. So, I mean...
He's the most human and sympathetic culprit.
Talk about how it truly is.
Anyhow, as he's giving his villain monologue, he goes, the barometer's falling. A storm's about to form here. And here you are. He calls you like a babe in the woods or something. And then Scott just rushes you and thumps you upside the head. And you wake up getting a phone call from Debbie. And Nancy goes, hey, Scott knocked me out. He's trying to escape or something. And, Debbie tells you that there's a tornado touchdown happening and we need the whole town to get into the storm shelter at the local theater, but the keys to the storm shelter are in Scott's car. So then Nancy has to get into the storm chasing car and just gun it as fast as she can to the theater, and then God, the storm shelter is double locked, echoing final scene. And there's a compartment past the first door with like 9 keys in it, and Nancy just keeps on having to try and key after key after key, and after like 5 keys, if you don't get it right, then the tornado just nabs everybody.
That puzzle is very well associated with great danger themes.
Yeah, it's a very interesting part of the game because this is the first time you ever get to go to the theater, and it's a really cool environment to be at. But overall, Nancy gets the storm door open, and as soon as the storm passes, she goes out to find Scott. And Debbie says, no, don't worry about it, Nancy. And Nancy insists that she has to go out and get him. And then you get into a crazy chase scene where you have to just follow Scott right on his tail for a very long time. Like a minute and a half, 2 minutes. It's not as bad as like chasing Yanni on the snowmobile.
I was just gonna compare that.
Yeah, because like there's no real obstacles in your way besides the storm. So long as you can see him, you'll know where to go.
There's also no cars on the road.
Oh yeah, that'd be hilarious if you could just crash into cars along the way. If he can crash into cars. Anyhow, Scott pulls over and gets stuck in a ditch and it gets up with a concussion or something right outside the old spring house. And so Nancy drags him inside and they wait out the storm until the authorities can arrive. And then the endgame letter begins to read. Scott's punishment gets community service, I think. I don't think he gets actual jail time. The community's very lenient on him, and they know that he cares about his work, but he still gets penalized, and he's probably never going to be able to rise again to the same level of storm chasing proficiency that he ever was. Doubt the Canute team will take him back. I believe that Debbie takes over as the leader of the Canute team, as she probably should, because she's still got the spark and vitality that her mentor once had. She's still got a little bit of life left in her.
Frosty, actually, I think he becomes a professional photographer. He gets to leave the team.
Good for him, yeah. Paw, he just finds peace and happiness working with the theater. He loves the theater.
Yeah,
we talk about that a lot.
I think he actually transitions more to theater than running the general store.
Yeah, and one of the funny things that they say is that the play that was going on, by the way, was a play about the town's history and all the historical things that have happened there since it was founded up to today. And after the events of the Endgame, they say that they actually add a final chapter to the play where Nancy Drew saves everybody and opens the key to the storm cellar and saves the entire town.
That little touch in the letter, it brings a little bit back to the atmosphere that this is just such a small, quaint town that everyone knows each other on a first name basis, and that Nancy's almost like a hero to this town. I think that's pretty neat.
Honestly, yeah. Otherwise, the game comes to a close with Nancy saying that she's just receiving tons and tons of shipments from Mom Paws of new candy, and shipments from Kohlmeister too. It's a case well solved, and sure enough, on the menu of the next game, Shadow at the Water's Edge, you can have a bowl of Kohlmeister candies that are left over at the...
Mom and Pa candies.
Mom and Pa candies, yeah. Manufactured by the Wickford Candy Company, same as Wickford Castle. So that is Nancy Drew Trail of the Twister. How would you rate it?
I always rate first. You want to go first this time?
Yeah, I guess I will go first this time. Okay, so So real quick, just to clarify how we grade on the Nancy Drew Games review series, is that we don't like to give numbers out of 10 to rate these games, because some Nancy Drews are better on paper than they are in practice. So on that note, we like to give letters on a grading scale from A to F, A being good, F being terrible, and then S tier is above A, and that is for the best of the best. This game, story and puzzles are astounding. I don't know if I'd say the same about Atmosphere. It's a very, very casual game for the most part. There's never anything that's particularly scary besides the storms. The music does get intense, but there's never like any eerie locations. Everything's brightly colored for the most part. The music is bright and cheerful. The suspects are all glowing in their character arcs and just the way that they talk with each other. I love the accents. I love Chase's country dialect and all that. The music's phenomenal, and the ending is so solid. And I didn't really think about it until now, but I think I'm going to have to stand by what I said, that there are very, very many good games in the 20s, and that this probably would be considered maybe the second golden age of the franchise. Nancy Drew Trail of the Twister, I may just have to... There's one thing keeping it from being an S, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be giving this game a high A. A higher A than Waverly Academy, mind you. And that would probably be... is that some of the puzzles just come off as a little bit too much for players that aren't so keen on puzzles. And this is especially seen with like the rat traps or the mouse trap puzzles repeating, the Fujita scales, which require you to scour over a bunch of pages in the game, and just some of the other parts that are just annoying to some players, like fixing the TV. Fixing the TV hurt my eyes. Julian wasn't even in the room when we played through that part, so he doesn't have to suffer through it. But fixing the TV was a hard puzzle. Some of the puzzles, while great in quality, aren't for every player. So I'm going to give this one a high A, but just shy of an S.
Alright, jumping into my review now. Story and premise, it's great, and it intertwines so well with Scott's character. I mean, I guess going into suspects now, obviously what stands out to me is Scott. I didn't realize it until now that Her Interactive did a very great job of depicting a depressed suspect. And, I mean, one of the key things that goes with depression is just like not caring about your workspace or your bedroom or anything. And I mean, gosh, is that clear in his workspace? It's filthy, and I'm just now noticing that's exactly what they were going for. He also, just in his monotone voice, he just seems like he has like no motivation in general, and the only thing that really makes him happy is the tornadoes, which his poor resources hinder his ability to even do that. All in all, Scott's character is incredible, but I still stand by my critique that Chase is a completely irrelevant character, that the game would have flowed just the same without him. I don't know. I just think that he wasn't necessary, though I guess I can appreciate his accent, sure. Puzzles in this game are great. I mean, the mousetraps get a little tedious. Other than that, I don't mind the Fujita scale puzzle, despite it being the mandatory screens being thrown about a couple of different areas in the game. It's a very educational game, but it's not annoying. Looking at you, Secret of the Scarlet Hand. Music is awesome, it goes perfect with the atmosphere. The ending of the game is great. I love Scott's explanation on why he did what he did. All in all, this game is an S game.
No way.
Yeah.
I think this is the first game that you've an S that I haven't.
Yeah, I think so too.
Wow. Okay.
It's an S game. It's extremely well done.
Man. Well, there you have it, folks. That is our review for Nancy Drew Trail of the Twister, one of the first exclusive Julian S. This is the first S that he's given out that I have given a lower grade on, so take that as you will. Take that with a grain of salt. We recently uploaded a long play of this game if you'd like to listen to the dialogue and country music and stuff like that with no commentary when you work on assignments or go to bed and stuff like that. And we will be having our review for Nancy Drew's Shadow at the Water's Edge coming imminently. That is going to be another fantastic one to review. That is a fantastic game with a fantastic story. But otherwise, hope you enjoyed the review of this fantastic game with its own fantastic story, and we hope that you'll be staying tuned for the rest of our uploads.
Alright everybody, thanks so much for listening. Make sure to comment and subscribe!
Okay, shut up.
I'm just kidding. Alright everybody, thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed, and be sure to remember, vote for Holt.
Vote for Holt, everybody.